What if the Irish travelers aren't who we thought they were? For generations, their story has been whispered in half-truths and written by those outside their world. Some said they were Roma, wandering in from distant lands. Others claimed they were broken by the Great Famine, forced onto the roads by desperation. But now science speaks. Hidden within the double helix of their blood lies a truth that shatters both these myths. Because when geneticists finally mapped the DNA of Irish travelers, they found no trace of Roma lineage, none. Not a single ancient strand linking them to the nomadic peoples of the East. And the famine? The DNA dates their separation from settled Irish to centuries before those black potato fields of the 1840s. A revelation that cuts through centuries of prejudice. These were never newcomers, nor outcasts of a single moment in history. No, this is an indigenous bloodline, carved into Ireland's very soil. And yet, for lifetimes, they were labeled as other. Forced to live in the margins, their story distorted by rumor and fear. But here's the question, the one that haunts the edges of this discovery. Can a people's true origin remain hidden, in plain sight, for over 300 years? And if their blood holds this forgotten chapter, what else lies beneath? If you're fascinated by lost histories and ancient DNA mysteries, subscribe now. Because the deeper we dig into this story, the stranger it becomes. And yet, the DNA revealed something even more unsettling. They walk the same roads, speak the same native tongue, share the same ancient island, but in the eyes of their DNA, they stand apart. When scientists first plotted the genetic signatures of Irish travelers, something strange emerged on the screen. A cluster, clear, sharp, undeniable. Not scattered among the settled Irish, not blending in with neighboring populations, but forming their own branch. A genetic island within the island. And here's the twist. When they measured the genetic distance between travelers and settled Irish, it wasn't subtle. It was vast. As large as the gap between an Irishman and a Spaniard. Think about that. Two peoples living side by side for centuries, yet their blood now holds the imprint of profound separation. How did this happen? It wasn't conquest. Not some foreign invasion. No. This was isolation from within. A choice, sometimes enforced, sometimes embraced, to marry within the community, to speak a secret tongue. Shelta spun from Irish, English, and Romani words, but wholly their own. To pass down crafts and traditions, whispered from parent to child. To live by rules few outsiders would ever understand. But there's a price to such fierce preservation. Each generation turning inward. Each marriage narrowing the gene pool. Each century carving deeper grooves into the DNA. Until today, that cluster glows like a beacon, telling a story few dared to write. But one question still hangs in the air, haunting both scientists and travelers alike. When did this hidden divergence begin? For years, the story was simple. Travelers became travelers because of the famine. That was the tale, repeated in textbooks, whispered in village gossip. Families forced from their land, taking to the roads in desperation. But then, scientists turned to the DNA. And what they found rewrote the very timeline of this people. Deep within their genomes, like rings in the trunk of an ancient oak, was a date. A split, not from foreign blood, but from their own Irish kin. And it wasn't 1845. Not even close. The genetic clock pointed centuries earlier, back to the mid-1600s. A time of brutal upheaval. Ireland burning under the shadow of the Cromwellian conquest. Fields seized, clans broken, entire ways of life shattered in the name of empire. It was a world where survival meant adaptation, or exile. And in that crucible, something unexpected took root. A group pulled away, not by chance, but by choice, by force, by circumstance. A people who would become travelers, not as a fleeting reaction to hunger, but as a resilient, self-contained culture forged across generations. They carried no written manifesto, no official origin story, but their oral traditions, the songs, the language, the rules of the road, all whispered of an older path, one that began long before the famine-starved fields. And yet another mystery remains. If their blood shows no Roma ancestry, then why across continents do they share such uncanny echoes of Roma life? Nomadism, craftwork, codes of honor. even the cadence of their secret tongue. The answer may lie in a place no one expected. For generations, one label clung to them: gypsies. A word wrapped in stereotype, suspicion, and an outsider's gaze. Because the travelers moved, they spoke a secret tongue. They forged metal, traded horses, lived apart from settled towns. And to many, that could only mean one thing: Roma blood, a branch of a vast nomadic diaspora, said to stretch from the Indus Valley to Ireland's green roads. But then the genome spoke. Scientists mapped it, strand by strand, across the entire traveler population. And what they found shattered that old narrative. Not a whisper of Roma ancestry. No trace of the Indo-Aryan markers that defined the Roma journey from northern India, through Persia, across Europe. The traveler's DNA is Irish, rooted in the same ancient gene pool as their settled neighbors. Their bloodlines did not cross the steppe, did not mingle with distant nomads. And yet, the parallels remain, eerily close. Two peoples, worlds apart in origin, who both carved lives on the move. Both kept languages shielded from outsiders. Both survived by skill, craft, and code. But their paths are not the same. One story begins in the east, the other, deep within Ireland's own soil. And for many travelers, this truth is a release. To finally shake off an identity imposed from the outside. To stand not as a borrowed people, but as something older, something fiercely their own. But the DNA held one more surprise. Beneath the surface, something even deeper waited to be found. There's a secret locked inside the blood. A pattern. So rare, so extreme, scientists gasped when they saw it. A signature of isolation, etched deep into the traveler genome. It's called autozygosity. In simple terms, stretches of DNA where both copies, mothers and fathers, are identical. Passed down, again and again, through generations of close kinship. But here, in the traveler people, it's not subtle. It's staggering. Among the highest levels ever recorded in all of Europe. It's as if their DNA became a time capsule, sealed tight, preserving ancient Irish markers, untouched by waves of foreign blood that swept through other parts of the island. Every choice mattered. Who married whom? Which families intertwined? Which clans guarded their bloodlines? And for centuries, those choices were guided by more than love. They were shaped by necessity, by loyalty, by an unspoken code. Endogamy, the practice of marrying within the community. It wasn't written in law, but lived in tradition, passed in whispers, enforced by honor. Because in a world that often pushed them to the margins, this was how they held on to identity. Through language, through craft, through blood. And so the DNA twisted inward, looping back upon itself, preserving the old, while also amplifying it. Resilience, etched in every strand. A living archive of who they were, and who they refused to become. But as scientists peered deeper, something unexpected surfaced. The DNA wasn't uniform. Hidden within that tight-knit code, faint patterns began to flicker. Subtle divides. Shadows of something older, something fragmented. And soon, those shadows would reveal the clans within the clans. The deeper they looked, the stranger it became. At first, the traveler DNA seemed tightly bound, one distinct cluster, one shared lineage. But beneath that surface, the code began to shimmer. Fine structure analysis, an advanced genetic lens, pulled the threads apart. And what it revealed, no one had expected. For distinct subgroups. For hidden clans, woven inside the traveler population. And it wasn't random. The patterns followed language. Because travelers do not speak just Irish or English, but Shelta, a cryptic tongue shaped across centuries, designed to protect knowledge from outsiders. And within Shelta, two dialects emerged, Cant and Gammon. Now on the genetic map, those dialects cast shadows in the DNA, clusters mirroring speech, blood echoing language, a living testament to how culture, even unspoken, can carve deep grooves into ancestry. And within this closed world, where marriage followed old clan lines and dialect signaled belonging, the diversity was more profound than anyone had imagined. Because here, isolation did not mean uniformity. It meant layers, stories folded within stories, families bound by more than name. And for the travelers themselves, many felt the truth of it, long before the science came. They knew who was of them, and who was not. Now, the DNA simply made the invisible visible. But such deep isolation, such tightly woven lines, carry a price. And as scientists turned their gaze from language to health, the consequences of these ancient patterns began to unfold. There is a shadow hidden within the blood, a consequence of the very choices that preserved this ancient identity. Generation after generation, the same families, the same clans, the same bloodlines turning inward. And over time, nature begins to play a cruel trick. It's called genetic drift. Founder effects. The invisible hand of chance, amplifying what was once rare into something devastating. In the traveler genome, entire stretches began to show it. Genes that, in the wider population, barely flicker, suddenly burning bright. Galactosemia, a disorder that leaves newborns unable to break down a simple sugar, turning nourishment into poison. Hurler syndrome, where the body slowly fills with toxic substances, trapping children in failing cells. And most chilling of all, severe combined immunodeficiency, SCID. Babies born without the immune defenses to survive even the gentlest breath of air. These are not isolated cases. In some traveler families, these names are spoken with grim familiarity. Funerals that come too soon. Medical records etched with the same rare diagnoses. And here lies the tension. For a culture that honors marriage within the tribe, where clan and kinship remain sacred, how do you weigh tradition against the risks carried silently in the blood? Some families embrace genetic testing. Others reject it, seeing it as an intrusion on their way of life. But with each passing generation, the burden grows heavier. Children, parents, elders, all caught in the web of a genetic past too powerful to ignore. And yet, from this tragedy, something unexpected began to emerge. Because hidden in these genetic patterns, scientists glimpsed not just disease, but unprecedented opportunity. And what they would discover next would ripple far beyond the traveler community. In every tragedy, there can be a hidden gift. For scientists, the very patterns that haunt traveler families also illuminate rare corners of the human genome. In this tightly woven population, mutations that would be nearly invisible in the broader world now stand in sharp relief. It's as though nature herself handed researchers a magnifying glass. Genes linked to galactosemia, now easier to trace. The elusive pathways of Hurler syndrome, suddenly laid bare. SCID mutations, once scattered and rare, now mapped with precision. And in this, the travelers are not alone. Across the globe, other founder populations have walked this same path. The Amish of Pennsylvania, the Navajo of the American Southwest, each the mirror of genetic isolation, carrying both burden and unexpected power. For medical science, these communities offer keys, unlocking how certain diseases work and how they might be treated. But here's where the story turns. For too long, science treated populations like the travelers as subjects, data points, curiosities. But now a new chapter begins. Today, many traveler families are stepping into the light, choosing to partner with geneticists, not as silent participants, but as equal voices, shaping how research is done, guiding what questions are asked, deciding how discoveries will serve their own people. For some, this is more than science. It is a reclamation of identity, proof that their history, long buried beneath stigma and myth, is written in every strand of DNA, a history of survival, of resilience, of belonging. But as these revelations reshape medicine, they also force a deeper question. If the genome defines a people, if culture shapes the very code of who they are, then what truly defines traveler ethnicity? For decades, they were called less Irish. An uncomfortable truth whispered in classrooms, printed in policy, written between the lines of the law. Travelers seen not as a people, but as a problem. Their culture dismissed as recent, their identity as invented. And then came the proof. In 2017, a quiet storm gathered in Dublin. A landmark genetic study, years in the making, revealed what the travelers themselves had always known. They were not a side effect of the famine, not an offshoot of Roma blood, not some modern fringe. They were Irish, deeply, ancestrally Irish, yet profoundly distinct. A people within a people. Centuries of separation, etched in the genome. And in that moment, science collided with politics. At long last, the Irish state faced an undeniable truth. That year, for the first time in history, travelers were formally recognized as a distinct ethnic group, an identity not granted, but affirmed. For the community, it was a moment of release. Generations of oral history, dismissed as folklore, now stood validated by hard science. Stories whispered around campfires, memories guarded through exile, suddenly given weight in the halls of power. It was more than a political victory. It was a reclamation of dignity, of belonging. But even as the ink dried on this new chapter, the DNA held one final twist. A deeper signal, faint, but undeniable, that could rewrite everything once again. It was meant to be settled. A divergence, mid-1600s. A community shaped by conquest, exile, survival. But in the data, beneath the obvious signals, something older began to flicker. Faint, elusive, but impossible to ignore. Certain genetic patterns, too ancient, too distinct, hinted at a story that may reach far deeper than Cromwell's time. Could the travelers, in fact, be carrying echoes of an even older lineage? Some geneticists now wonder, were they descendants of medieval clans who chose a path apart, or something more ancient still, tied to Gaelic pastoralist bands that roamed Ireland long before the first English footfall? A life built not on settled farms, but on seasonal movement. Livestock, trade, craftsmanship, an older rhythm of life, nearly erased from memory. And if so, the travelers may be not a product of displacement, but the last custodians of a forgotten Irish lifeway, a living bridge to an Ireland that existed long before written records, before land deeds, before borders were drawn. But how far back does that bridge really stretch? Are we glimpsing the legacy of medieval fragmentation, or something woven into the island's earliest fabric? The answers remain just out of reach, buried in fragments of ancient DNA, waiting to be found. And for scientists, and for the travelers themselves, the deeper question now stirs. What other untold genetic legacies still lie hidden beneath Ireland's soil? It is a paradox written in blood, genetically Irish, yet profoundly distinct. The same ancient roots, the same deep well of ancestry. And yet, through centuries of choice, of circumstance, of survival, a people set apart. A mirror, held up to Irish identity itself. One side reflecting kinship, shared language, shared land, shared origin. The other, marked by the scars of separation, by exile, by misunderstanding, by a fierce insistence on remaining other. For centuries, they were pushed to the margins, their story reduced to whispers, to slurs, to myths written by outsiders. But now, through the language of DNA, the truth begins to speak. A truth of resilience, of a culture that bent but never broke, of bloodlines that refused to vanish, even when the world around them tried to erase their place. And in that truth lies a deeper lesson. That identity is not a simple line on a map, not a checkbox on a form. It is something shaped across generations by memory, by tradition, by the choices of those who came before. And in this, the travelers stand as a testament, a living archive of an Ireland that still holds mysteries beneath its surface. For if one people can carry such a hidden history, how many more stories remain untold? How many other legacies still sleep in the bones of this ancient land? Join us next time as we journey deeper into Ireland's DNA and the secrets still buried beneath its soil.